Hello and good afternoon, everyone. Very warm welcome to the second in the series of webinars titled Coming Back Stronger. I'm Tim Mart. I'm CEO of Know You More, who are hosting these webinars. We're living in extraordinary times with uncertainty and rapid change. And within that uncertainty have emerged the opportunities for people in society to cut through the way it's always been done and make positive changes. Our aim for this series is to share just a few of those leadership stories and new ways that coaching is being employed to support people as part of those changes. The structure for today's webinar is a relatively simple one. In a moment, I'll hand over to our guests for a 20-minute interview, and then we'll open up for a Q&A session. You'll note that you'll have a bar in front of you with a Q&A icon in it. And if you could pop your questions in there, then what we'll do is we'll get to those questions at the latter half of our session today. For those of you that are social media savvy, then you'll see that we've created a special hashtag for the event, hashtag KYMCBS. So please, we do encourage you to tweet away any thoughts, any insights, and any feedback from the session itself. And so to our guests, it gives me great pleasure to introduce today's interviewer, Camilla Dagerth, and our speaker, Gillian Strachan. Camilla is, she coaches teams and individuals focused on creating trust and clarity in a cross-cultural or in a virtual space. She's also one of Know You More's founding coaches. She's done some amazing work with us, including digital coaching across many of our projects within the NHS. She'll be speaking with Gillian Strachan, Head of Leadership and Development at NHS Education for Scotland. Thank you so much for joining us, both of you. Really looking forward to hearing from you. And without further ado, I will hand over to you, Camilla.
Thank you, Tim. And it's such a pleasure to be here with everybody today. And I look forward to hearing more about this. Gillian, would you mind starting just to share with me and the audience a bit more about your role?
Yeah, sure. As Tim said, I'm head of programme for leadership and organisational development at NHS Education for Scotland, also known as NES. So if I refer to NES, that's what it means. It's a bit of a mouthful each time to get the full title out. I kind of co-lead a department of about 36 people. All of us providing educational, leadership and talent management resources across the health and social care workforce. So we're very much externally facing and about providing that kind of national resource for leadership development, not just in the NHS, but across the whole of the health and social care workforce. And obviously included in that is a sort of element of the portfolio that we have is around providing and supporting coaching for that health and social care workforce.
Thank you. So could you, social care.
What do we mean by social care?
What exactly does that mean? Yes, please.
Yeah, okay. Good question. Lots of people ask that. So everyone's very familiar with the NHS. We know what we're talking about when we talk about the NHS. All of us have had some kind of contact with the NHS. Social care is that part of our care workforce, which isn't in the NHS, but provides all that essential care that is kind of, if you like, non-medical, non-clinical. So it's our workers in local authorities, supporting social services and social care from the local authority point of view, but it also covers two other really important sectors for us in terms of our workforce, which is the voluntary sector. So most of you will have come across lots of sort of, they've probably been in the media more during the pandemic than they have in any other time. It's that workforce that supports our care homes, our residential care for vulnerable people. It supports our early child development work that we do as a nation. So it's a very wide-ranging group of staff, both in voluntary sector, in local authority sector, but also it includes the independent sector. So in those situations, we're talking about independently run, you might call it private sector care services, and there's a range of those as well. It's a huge workforce, and in total, so to be a little bit of context, NHS Scotland employs about 160,000 people. When you add the social care workforce to that, we have a round total of about 440,000 people employed in caring services across Scotland. That's just Scotland. That's not taking in the other countries. That's just Scotland. Our health and social care workforce is about 440 people. 40,000 people, thousands, don't forget the thousands.
Yeah, that's good. Thank you for clarifying that, because I don't think everybody could understand that without really having it clarified.
Yeah.
So thank you. And I believe you have a small presentation that you'd like to share with us to clarify a bit more about the project.
Yes, so I'm going to share my screen, and hopefully if the tech goddess is with me, you will be able to see my slideshow. Can everybody see that? Is everybody okay with that?
Yes.
Yeah, and somebody will let me know if there are issues with the slides, hopefully. So Camilla, I'll rely on you for that.
Yeah.
So I suppose what I want to do today is tell your story. This is about stories about coming back stronger, and this is a story about how we try to support people to not just come back stronger, but survive and if possible, thrive in what was some very, very challenging times for us earlier in this year. And I suppose the story of coaching for wellbeing started with a question. And it was a really deceptively simple question. And it was, what can we do to help? For me, that really became the sort of the central part of what coaching for wellbeing was about. It was about people coming together, recognizing that there was a crisis, that there was a workforce in health and social care that were doing whatever they could to help us as a nation manage that crisis, but who was looking after them. So the question first came from a few of our executive coaches. So one of the things that we're responsible for in NES is supporting and managing a register of executive coaches who, as the name suggests, tend to provide coaching for our most senior leadership cohort, mainly across NHS Scotland, but increasingly into social care as well. And some of these coaches got in touch with me and said, so this was pretty much at the start of lockdown, and said, you know, what can we do to help? We want to help in some way. We can see the need. We can see, you know, the support that might be needed for our workforce. What can we do? And I suppose that question reflected both for me what I was feeling, but also what many of my colleagues in health and social care were feeling who were not at that front line. So my role is a sort of backroom job. I'm not on the front line of clinical care, but we feel very close to our frontline colleagues. And there was a real strong feeling, and I was hearing this message from a whole load of our colleagues from around the system saying, what can we do to help? What can we offer? What in terms of our resources, our talents, our skills, can we do to help those who are really probably right at the front end of this crisis and already feeling the impact of that pandemic? The other bit that I think we recognise is even those who are not at the front line were feeling the impact of this pandemic. It wasn't just those in those frontline clinical caring, but people whose jobs, whose daily lives have been turned upside down, who had been perhaps taken off everything that they knew in terms of their work and put somewhere different or new to do something else, who had perhaps been parachuted into teams that they had never worked in before. So there was a huge disruption to the system as a whole here. So it started really in fairly small scale. It started as offers of pro bono coaching from about a dozen of the coaches from the executive register. But I started to get also a trickle of offers from what I would call our internal coaches, our internal bank of coaches from within health and social care organisations. So some of those organisations have trained their own coaches to work in those organisations. And some of them got in touch and said, is there any way that I can use some of my capacity to support people more widely? So I started to think about this, and then I thought, I need to talk to Tim at Know You All. And we'd already been working with Tim around another digital coaching offer, because the one thing that was very obvious to me was that if we were going to make this offer impactful and accessible, then we needed to do that using the best we could get of technology and support from a digital point of view, because clearly we weren't going to be doing face-to-face coaching in the current situation. So I contacted Tim, and immediately he said, how can we help? What can we do to help? So that question again, what can we do to help? So in that conversation, we knew any offer needed to be digital, and we knew that ease of access was absolutely paramount. We needed to make it really easy for people to get the support that we were going to offer. We didn't want them to be jumping through hoops or going up through chains of command to get permission. We wanted to make something that we could reach out directly to people who might need that support. So digital was absolutely the way to go. And so at that point, we had, as I said, we had a few offers from our executive coaches. We had some offers from internal coaches from organisations like health boards and other parts of the social care system. And we had Tim, so we started to make some plans. And then Good Friday happened. I will never forget, it was Good Friday, and I was contacted by somebody, those of you who were on the first seminar in this series will have met, Dave Caesar. Dave is the head of leadership, wellbeing and culture, or was at the time, the head of leadership, wellbeing and culture in the Scottish Government. I have done a lot of work with Dave over the years around leadership. And he got wind of what we were starting to do. And I kind of explained that it was quite a limited offer, but we were going to try and make it as impactful as we could. And he said, if I gave you lots of money, could you make it bigger, essentially? I don't think there was any other really more nuanced way of saying that. That was a little bit of a game-changing moment. And we said, yes, we can definitely do more. So support us with the cash, and we will do whatever we can to make this the biggest and best offer that we can make to the service. What it did do is it allowed us to recruit the rest of our executive coaching register, to go out to the system and recruit more internal coaches that we could get to join the campaign. And the other thing that it allowed us to do is Dave at the time was instrumental in setting up what is now called the National Wellbeing Hub, which is basically, as it suggests, a hub of resources around supporting people's wellbeing and resilience. And so we were able to use the leverage of that to also market and get that message out there that this service was available to people. We set ourselves a target at that very first sort of conversation of around being able to provide about 1,000 coaching hours that would be free for anybody in the health and social care workforce. And people challenged me, and I think others at the time, a little bit about that, about, well, what do you mean anybody? And I said, I mean anybody. They said, oh yes, but you'll need to prioritise that because you won't be able to cover everybody. And I said, no, I know. But if we prioritise, we are sending out a message that coaching is only for those and such as those, you know, because there was a little bit of pressure from some directions to say, well, maybe you should prioritize leaders, or maybe you should prioritize, you know, clinicians, or maybe you should prioritize, you know, another group. And actually our view was that this could help anybody in any situation in any part of our workforce, and therefore it ought to be available to them. Yes, we knew we would be limited in terms of not being able to cover 440,000 people, but we knew that probably wouldn't actually become an issue. But it became quite an important principle for us to say this is for anybody, anywhere, no matter what they are doing in our workforce. We developed 2 offers, and neither of which really conform to kind of your typical approaches that you would see in coaching, certainly in healthcare, in that they were really quite short interventions. Normally we're offering quite a kind of long-term relationship through our coaching offers. This is a much shorter, sharper intervention that we were offering. So we had 2 offers, one which was a sort of 90-minute offer of coaching. And essentially that was very much based around the model that the KYM team, the Know You More team, had developed around self-care in a crisis. So it's that self-coaching model. So saying, actually, you just need 90 minutes or so. And with this, you can then, 90 minutes with a coach, you can then go on and support and sustain your own resilience using some of the tools that you'll have been introduced to. The other offer, though, recognised that we would probably have people coming through our doors who had more complex issues, who had deeper personal and professional things, perhaps already things that they had been living with before the crisis. So maybe more significant mental health issues might appear. And we also recognised that we would have some individuals who were not just trying to maintain their own resilience, but also trying to support staff in very challenging circumstances. And so for that reason, we also made a second offer of, you know, if people felt that that was applicable to them, then offering up to 3 hours of coaching was available. So we had sort of 2 offers. So there were some resistance, some doubters, some people who didn't think we would attract very much interest or attention, which was interesting because I was pretty sure we would. But because of that, we agreed that we would take the cash from the Scottish Government in a phased way. And we sort of said, well, let's start giving us a quarter of the money and let's see. And, you know, I kind of had in my head that might support about maybe 300 participants. We maybe might take 3 or 4 weeks to get to that point, by which case we could be assess demand and then sort of draw down more resources if we need it. So our marketing went live on a Friday evening, I think it was about 4 o'clock on a Friday. And I think by Friday evening, we had got halfway to our first 300. I think we had about 150. By the time we got to the following Monday morning, we had basically essentially used up all the resources that we had been given. And at that point, I kind of phoned Dave in a panic and said, "You're going to have to give us the rest of the money now." So, which was fantastic, but it was a bit of that moment of going, oh, blimey, that was a bit unexpected. So what I'm going to do now, that's kind of really gives the sort of the background of kind of how it came about. And what I want to do now is share some of the data that we've gathered through the process over the last kind of sort of 16 weeks. Certainly it's actually a little bit more than that now, but we took a kind of data snapshot at 16 weeks to kind of give you a flavour of the reach that we've had with this, but also perhaps some of the data around how people were coming into this, what they were looking for from it. And also we've been able to do a sort of 16-week evaluation. So looking at some of the responses from that evaluation about what are the stories that people are telling as they're coming out of the coaching. So as of, I think, last week, we had a total registration number of 1,200 people. So 1,200 people have come to the site and have completed the first part of registration, indicating that they might be interested in receiving some coaching. Not all of those registrations turned into actual coaching relationships. And there are a variety of reasons for that. Sometimes people kind of register for something, reach out for something, and then have second thoughts, or it's just taken them a little bit longer to come around to kind of thinking about what that means for them. But as it stands at the moment, we have just shy of 800 people in active coaching, either who have received the coaching and completed or who are going through that process now. So the kind of conversion rate has been sort of about sort of 2/3 of those that initially contact, then go on into active coaching. So we have either completed or are in the process of completing about, as I say, it's just shy of that 790 something active coaching relationships, so active trainees. The way it kind of broke down by sector was really interesting. I was quite concerned that because this was coming from an NHS organisation, that it might not successfully reach into our social care sector, because sometimes that is a deterrent. And there's something about the social care sector that sometimes thinks, well, that's for the NHS, it's not for us. We were really careful in the way that we'd marketed it, though, to make sure that that message got across. And I was really delighted with the response that we got. It somewhat inevitably, 60% of the take up was from within the NHS, but I was delighted with the, just shy of 40% of people coming from all three aspects of social services and social care. So we've had local authority, voluntary sector and private sector all engaging in this. We worked really hard with partners to get the message out there, and it seems to have worked. And also, what I was saying earlier about it was important for us not to prioritise this for senior management or managers or leaders. We asked people to kind of identify which of these kind of categories that they most closely felt their role fell into. And you can see the huge reach we've had into the kind of lowest levels of the organisation at team member level. We have had a few executive leaders, we've had a few chief execs, we've had senior managers, and we've had that kind of sort of middle manager leader sort of cohort also engaging with this. But you can see from how it's panned out, we have had a huge reach, which I am finding amazingly encouraging, that people who perhaps traditionally do not get offered coaching have seen this as something that might support them and that hopefully has supported them. There's a bit of a split. If you remember, I talked about option 1 and option 2. Option 1 being the kind of short, sharp split. Option 2 tended to be more popular. I wonder whether sometimes that's because people think more must be better. So, and there was no difference to them in terms of cost. So maybe I'll go for 3 hours when actually 90 minutes might have worked well. I know that we had, and I'm very aware that we've got a few of the coaches who were involved in this on the call today. So, and I know that we've sought feedback, and there were some misgivings about the shortness, and I think that comes from a place of coaches really wanting to do their absolute best for their coachees and wondering whether 90 minutes or even 3 hours was going to be sufficient. But I think we were all quite surprised in the actual application of this about how much could be achieved in relatively short space of time around a very specific issue of well-being. So I'm interested. There isn't actually in the evaluation really any difference in evaluation comments or scoring between the options. They're scoring almost exactly the same in terms of sort of satisfaction. I'll come on to that in a moment. So I take the of different options was interesting, and I think but reflective probably of a range of factors there. When we asked people to kind of sign up and get involved in their coaching once they'd contacted us, we asked them a few questions to kind of give us some kind of baseline to assess the impact against and for them to assess their own the impact for themselves. So we did ask people to kind of initially, before they had their coaching, to rate their overall health, well-being and morale on a scale of 1 to 10. And the kind of the average, the mean, came out at around 6. And that 5 and 6 were the most frequent responses there, and the average was about 6. Equally, we asked them about how confident they were feeling in tackling the issues that they were facing. So not just about their own personal well-being, but what was their sense of agency in actually being able to kind of tackle some of the things that were in front of them, recognizing that some of those challenges were very significant for some. And again, we came out at around sort of 5 and 6. The average this time was 5. And lastly, we did recognize that some of our folk would be also in leadership or management roles. And so we said, if this question is appropriate to you, have a think about how confident you feel about meeting the needs of others. You know, how are you feeling about meeting the needs of your team in terms of their well-being and motivation? So, and again, sort of similar kinds of scores. What was perhaps more interesting, though, was the questions we asked them about what was going on for them in terms of why they were seeking this kind of support. And in response to that kind of what was going on for me question, I put up a few direct quotations from the kind of application data that we had. We've got a huge richness in application data. We've got enormous amounts of raw data around some of this, but these are probably typical comments from people who are coming to coaching. So a lot of it was about that total disruption to family and social and work networks. So feeling alone, feeling that, you know, their normal sources of support maybe weren't available to them, or they didn't want to burden those sources of support with their own feelings or issues. Feelings of helplessness and feelings of anxiety around not only their own anxiety, but also supporting others who also have high levels of anxiety. So that sort of team lead issue coming through in a lot of the comments about, I'm struggling, how am I going to support my staff who are struggling? And sometimes that sense of burnout, of that lack of support that people are feeling, so feeling tired and unsupported, hitting the wall. I think we heard that quite a lot in quite a lot of the pre-coaching comments, is that I've just lost all confidence in myself, I've hit a wall, I can't see how I'm going to get past that. So I don't think we were in any doubt as soon as we started seeing the applications coming through that this was going to be a much needed service, and there's something that we could really do for that. So moving on to kind of what things look like after coaching, we asked the folk to also, in their evaluations, to answer the same 3 questions. So again, we asked people how they would rate overall their health, well-being and morale. And these are average scores, so there are some variations, but almost in the sort of 160 responses that we were looking at the 16-week point, because we had about 160 evaluation responses back at that point, almost all had moved up post-coaching from their original scores. And you'll see that the most common shift was up to around, we took an average probably around 8, and a move of +2 was probably one of the most common scores that we saw in terms of how people were rating their health and well-being and morale. Equally, you'll see the same kind of shift in how confident people were feeling. So that feeling of agency, can I tackle what's in front of me now? Also a big leap in leadership confidence. So actually that's probably the biggest shift for those who were in leadership roles, feeling more confident and more able to support their own staff. We asked some qualitative questions in our evaluation, and these are some of the comments that have come back about how people were feeling post their coaching. I'll let you read them for yourselves, but again, I think you'll see quite a lot there around feeling more in control, feeling that personal agency returning. So words empowering, putting me back in control, giving me a platform to work on. So all about those kind of people's self-efficacy essentially improving through the medium of the coaching that they'd had. We asked 3 sort of final questions really about sort of, again, just trying to get some kind of quantitative data about kind of responses. And this was an interesting one statistically to analyse. So our average answer to the question, to what extent do you feel coaching has effectively supported you, was 9. The second one was probably the most eye-opening one for me, in that it was actually very difficult to land on an average of 10. It's really quite tricky to do that. But genuinely, I think if you took the kind of the actual kind of figure, I think it's 9.9989 or something like that when we actually did it. So, so we counted that a 10 rather than a 9. We rounded up that last kind of hundredth of a point to make that a 10. And the other thing I think was really important here was the ease of using the online platform. I think that is what made this work. If I'm brutally honest, we could not have done this without an online platform that worked as well as this did. And without the support of the team behind that online platform, because we know that it isn't just about the tech. I think probably one of the most brilliant things, the most enjoyable thing about being involved in this has been the interaction between the team that I had in NES working on it and the team that we had in Know You More working on it, and the way that we worked together. It made all the difference in the world. The other aspect of that, obviously, is the absolutely brilliant coaching community that we built around this. I couldn't be more proud of the community that came together around this. Our exec coaching register, hugely experienced coaches, but also joined by people who had much less experience, sometimes quite new coaches for us in the internal coaching sort of side of things. And that the sense of community that we were able to create for and with the coaches to support this program, I think was absolutely critical in its success. That coaches were supporting other coaches through the community that we created on the platform. At one point, we were very concerned about levels of mental health with some of the people that were accessing our resources. And there was some real concern, quite rightly, from coaches about, we're not trained counsellors, we're not mental health experts. How do we support people, triage them, signpost them when we think there's more appropriate things that need to be accessing? And we were really lucky. A couple of our coaches were also clinical psychologists. They worked on a great set of resources to support the coaches in being able to spot those times and those individuals that might need more support or other types of support as well as their coaching sometimes, and to have those conversations. And that really built a confidence in the coaching community. So I think it's that question, what can we do to help, came from so many different people and was answered in so many different ways. But it really was the key question. It's about people coming together, recognizing a really desperate need and offering their talents, resources and skills, whatever those were, to bring something together, which has been, I think, phenomenally successful. So I have no idea whether that was 10 or 15 minutes, Camilla, and I apologize if I went on far too long, but I'll stop now.
You know what? If it took longer, that is wonderful, because I'm totally speechless looking at these numbers. I mean, having the privilege to be part of this, thank you. It's wonderful to see. And I do believe we have some questions, right, Tim? So should we skip straight into questions from the audience, or should I do another one of mine? Because I do respect the fact that it's important to pick up on those questions from the audience. But perhaps while Tim is looking, I could ask you, Gillian, how would you like to round this up? If I allow you to leave us with some parting words, coming back stronger?
Coming back stronger, I suppose you don't know how strong you are till you do this stuff. And I think actually in some ways that's the story of the coaching. It was about people rediscovering their strengths. So coming back stronger, I think it's more about, maybe it's more rediscovering the strength you have and being supported to do that. And I think that was, hopefully, I think that's what came very strongly through from what the coachees said. But I would say, I think what it showed me, this experience, what it showed me is how strong we can be when we do come together and collaborate in the way that we did around this. And it's extraordinary how many barriers that would normally be put in place in normal times vanished because of the times we were in. I remember an early conversation with my head of digital in NES, who would normally want me to kind of really go out to, I'd have to go out to tender, I'd have to do all sorts of things. I would have to kind of sort of consider the merits of in-house provision and external, there would have been a huge amount of stuff I'd have to do. And I actually phoned him and said, look, this is what I want to do. And he said, go do it. And it's about that sort of actually when it gets really challenging, as it has done, then if people start with the same intent, then actually there's a huge amount we can achieve, even in what is generally a very bureaucratic environment, which is kind of public service in general. But so coming back stronger, it's more about rediscovering the strength you have and the strength that you have that comes from working with others with the same intent.
Thank you very much for those words. Very important, I'd say. And Tim, have you found a question that?
There's a couple of questions here, Gillian. First one's from Marcos. He asked, brilliant, Gillian, thank you. What would you do differently? What are the lessons learned from this excellent intervention?
Okay, so I'm going to be really honest here. I'm not sure I know the answer to that question yet. I think it feels at the moment we're still in the middle of it. We are thinking about what comes next and what we've learned from this. And we are in conversations, for example, with Scottish Government about a longer term offer here. And so there are things we will change. We will probably simplify the offer. Because actually we realized we didn't really need two different offers. We just needed one offer with a bit of flexibility around it. So that will be something that we will probably look to do if we get the support to continue this. But I guess what we haven't been able to do is really sit down and reflect, because we are still in health and social care in the middle of a crisis, and that's ramping up again, and we recognise that. So there is a little bit of not yet having been able to take that moment to step back and say, now it's all over, because it isn't over. What would we do differently? I think what we're trying to do is be as agile as we can, and tweaking and changing and making sort of changes to the way that we do things. And we've done that throughout. What I would say is we learned as we went along. The starting place of where we were the way that we were trying to match coaches and coachees, it was incredibly cumbersome and hugely time consuming. We got so much better at that in terms of refining our process for doing that and understanding what was important and what really wasn't. So I suppose I don't have a direct answer to that, other than there will come a time, I hope, when we can do some proper reflection And I would want to also, as part of that, I would want to follow up with some of our coachees in a year's time and say, how is it now? And what is it that we did a year ago that stayed with you or has not stayed with you? Or what have you been able to take into your life in the longer term? And that will be an interesting exercise to really understand the longer term impact of this.
Funnily enough, you've just beautifully gone into another couple of questions that were asked there.
Did I? Sorry.
Catherine kindly asked, are there plans to revisit outcomes after a longer period, which you've touched on then, which is when we were having conversations, very much part of the plan, in terms of how do we start to establish the long-term impact of this. And then, there was another one from Isa question there, just around what's the long-term plan for it. What I'm gathering is
conversations with Scottish Government, which are heading in the right direction, but we haven't quite landed it yet, but hoping at least to be able to continue with probably a slightly amended version of this up until the end of March 2022 is what we are hoping for. We're still not quite there yet, but we're trying to kind of look at making a more sustainable model for this in the longer term.
Fantastic. I've kind of covered off most of the questions just now, so wait for another to come in. I just have a personal question, Gillian, just in case you've come across any stories, particularly in discussions with the team, etc., that have maybe warmed the heart a little bit. One of the, as you think about one of those, I had a conversation with someone, I was having a coffee with them on Tuesday, who's involved in this as one of the internal coaches, and he said to me, Tim, I'm gonna have to be honest, I completely plagiarized option one coaching and offered it out to 400 people who were experiencing similar things as doing with NES, and replicated that model, and it's been received wonderfully. And I thought, wow, that's real ripple effect, that's real impact, that's not, they've done something so future focused or future thinking, I guess, that it can be taken and has now been applied elsewhere. So that made me feel particularly grateful. I just wondered if there was any stories yourself that you'd heard along the way that warmed up the heart.
So yeah, I mean, I think I've heard of a couple of instances of that. What was interesting also, and I know I don't think either of the people I'm thinking of are on the call today, but I know a couple of the coaches were approaching me at some point saying, I've just done a 90-minute session with somebody. They've really loved the model. They're wondering whether we can come out and do it with their team. Now, we weren't resourced to do that. So, it was a kind of a no, but my sense was that people were really latching on to this idea of actually there is something we can do. And this model might help us do it. And so I think people were starting to kind of take that out back into their organizations to work with. And I think that's probably one of the reasons why the leadership score rose so sharply, probably the most, because I think people felt that they'd been given a tool. Now, that tool had initially been given for them to work on their own resilience, but in doing that, they had done some learning that they could then take and say, well, I can maybe take this tool now and use it with my people. And it was giving them that confidence of having something, to work with, which I think was probably one of the most powerful things for that particular group of coachees who do have that kind of sort of leadership or management role. So I think there has been a ripple effect from it. I think there's been there are individual kind of stories that I think are particularly poignant, and people who so I mean, some of the quotations that I didn't put in were things like, I feel I've got my life back, I feel I actually now can actually stay in this role and fight a bit more. I am concerned about where we are nationally in terms of the pandemic again, and I know that just speaking to a coach the other day who'd had somebody a new registration, a new coachee last week, who is coming from the care home side of things, was facing a real crisis, and recognizing that actually, there's still a lot of work out there for us to do with this if we can. It's slightly on pause at the moment. It's certainly a reduced service because we need to establish the funding that we need, but there's absolutely no doubt about it that it's still needed. And I think this winter will be challenging. So, if we can get this off the ground again soon, I'll be really pleased, because it's so needed.
Thanks, Gillian. It's a nice question there from Mandy, actually. Sorry, I might have jumped in on you there, Camilla, but it popped out. It says, do you think you converted the skeptics, those who have seen the benefit?
It's a great question, Mandy. I definitely converted one. So early on, I had a conversation with one of the heads of psychology in our system, who knew a bit about coaching, but was quite skeptical about, that's not really what people will need. They'll need psychological first aid. And I said, well, the two things are not mutually exclusive, and yes, it can make and will make a difference. And we have been sharing some of our findings with folk like that particular individual, and I have to say she's absolutely delighted, slightly surprised, but absolutely delighted both at the response we've had, the spread, the reach, and the impact that it's having. I hope I'll convince more skeptics when we get our evaluation report finished and published and more widely disseminated. But yeah, I think there was we were able to provide quite early participation data back into the kind of steering group in Scottish Government, some of whom had been quite sceptical. So we were really pretty quickly able to say, well, I know you didn't think this is something that was needed, but look, here it is.
Yeah, brilliant.
Yeah, and I was going to pick up on John's question about face-to-face coaching versus digital coaching, but in a way, do you have any more thoughts on that? How do you compare the two? Some people think...
Yeah, I think, and I think I wouldn't be being unfair to some of our really experienced coaches, some of whom work already had a sort of a mixed media in terms of how they do their coaching, but quite a few of our coaches, for very good reasons, I think much prefer to do that coaching, have that coaching relationship and in face-to-face. And I would, I completely respect that. I think there's a quality that can come sometimes with being in the room with that person. And I know that was a very important pillar for many of our coaches in terms of the way that they coach. I think all of our coaches recognized that simply wasn't going to be possible, so that had to be put aside. I think some of them were pleasantly surprised at how much could be achieved via a screen. I think probably quite a few of them would still argue the case that face-to-face is better, and I have no problem with that. But I think what we have been able to demonstrate is that it can work and does work. Maybe doesn't work in quite the same way, and there is a different feel to it, but there is no doubt that really powerful work can be done in an online environment. What we did talk about quite a lot is a lot of people noticed that actually sometimes an hour or an hour and a half was too long, which might feel okay in a face-to-face environment, but and I guess we've all felt this through all the multiple Zoom and Teams calls that we've been living our lives through. Well, certainly I have in the last 6 months, that there is a limit to there's an intensity to the on-screen side of things that can be difficult to sustain over very long periods of time. So I think what that might have done is triggered a sort of shorter sessions, but more of them within the time, rather than going for, say, the full 90 minutes in one go. Very often I think the pattern was 3 30-minute sessions for some, or a 45-minute session and a 30-minute session. So I think there were a couple of different variations with how people sort of used that time, and that was perhaps driven a little bit more by the digital thing, actually, because actually if you were doing it face-to-face and you were traveling, you wouldn't do a 30-minute session. It just wouldn't feel, but actually digitally that works. So it definitely has its pros, as well as perhaps some cons. So I can see a difference going forward from here, that we won't perhaps be as reliant only on face-to-face coaching, but I would never discount either the need or sometimes the value and the quality of face-to-face coaching too.
Yeah. Again, Gillian, you're in a few of the comments in the chat there around the ability to do focus work in 90 minutes. Really there's not enough time to waste, with nice, really focus. And some of the coaches actually saying, it's some of the best work they've ever done.
Yes, and I should have said that as part of our evaluation, we've also sought feedback from the coaches. and to get their views on their experience as coaches, both in terms of what they were seeing and themes that were coming through for them, but also their own experience in working in this way, because there's important learning there for us too.
Perfect. As we look to wrap up, we sort of just hit the 45-minute mark now. Just a final question there. You know, as someone who's set up this fantastic initiative, do you have any advice for other leaders who may like to set up something similar in their region, maybe even outside of Scotland? What would...
Work with good partners, and build your collaboration well. I think, you know, I think this wasn't something that we could just set up and launch. We had to kind of think about what are all the aspects of doing that. Who do we need to, where do we need to pull the levers? Who do we need to kind of work with? And it is actually, this is probably one of the most relational things I've ever done, in terms of actually this was only ever going to come together with the goodwill of people, you know, that we weren't in a position to mandate anything really. So we were looking for that kind of, you know, that goodwill, and we were lucky because we had a crisis driving this, and a recognized need of everybody. I think everyone felt that kind of slight helplessness at the start of lockdown about, we can see what's happening, but how could we help? And then being able to kind of give people an answer to that and give people a direction in which they could help really helped us. So, but it is a relational piece, I think. I think it is, again, it's about how we work with others and how we build that kind of common purpose and common intent. And the common intent here was we all wanted to help in some way. And this helped us shape a direction in which we could all make a contribution.
I don't know about you, Camilla, but that's quite a lovely way to wrap it up.
It is a lovely way to wrap it up. At the same time, you know, this whole thing that it's not location dependent. When it's digital coaching, you know, the partner can be
anywhere.
Anywhere.
Yeah,
exactly.
It's been one of the few bonuses, and that goes for across all the rest of my work as well. I've been able to collaborate in some ways more easily. It's not that I like Zoom calls and team calls, because I don't. I'm desperate to get back into an office and meet real people, be in the same space as them. But there are some aspects of it that actually makes it easier to connect and collaborate, because you're not trying to organize everybody to be in exactly the same place at the same time.
Exactly. Thank you.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. Huge thank you to Camilla and to Gillian for that absolutely wonderful story of inclusivity, of collaboration, of relationships. Thank you everyone for joining us today, and we'll be announcing the next in the series of the Coming Back Stronger next month. We're already nearly in November. Thank you much for joining us. Again, use the KYM CBS hashtag to share your insights. I'm sure we'd be keen to follow up on those afterwards, and I hope you enjoyed the session. The recording materials will be shared out via LinkedIn, and if you go onto our resources page, then you will find those there. One of the actual resources that Gillian mentioned, which is an evolution of the self-care in a crisis model, is actually being launched later this week as that leadership group coaching model, which will be free for you to use and work with your teams. So do feel free to download that, and we'll let you know when it's out there. Once again, thank you so much, Gillian and Camilla.
It's been a pleasure. And thank you to, I know there's quite a few of the people on here were coaches with us on this, and I am so grateful to you all and all the colleagues who are not here today, because that's really what made the difference.
Wonderful. Thank you, everyone. Bye for now.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.